Breaking just moments ago, new data showing January was the worst month for job cuts since the 2009 Great Recession. CNN senior reporter Matt Egan is joining me now. What else is this report telling you?
Yeah, Sarah, look, this is a bad way to start 2026, right? Layoffs way up, hiring way down. So Challenger Gray and Christmas reports that during the month of January, U.S.-based employers announced just over 108,000 layoffs. Now, that is roughly double January of 2025 and roughly triple the end of last year. In fact, Sarah, as you mentioned, this is the highest since January 2009 during the great financial crisis. Of course, that was just months after the collapse of.
If you want to visualize power slipping away from a president, you don't have to imagine it anymore. You can watch it happen in real time. My name is Olivia Hale. What we are witnessing right now is a rare convergence of events that almost never hit all at once. Economic warning signs flashing red, public trust collapsing, legal pressure tightening, allies distancing themselves, and a president responding not with clarity or leadership, but with denial, grievance, and spectacle. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. This is not about one bad headline or one rough news cycle.
But if the president prevails in this lawsuit, he's going to be able to pocket that money. My question is the president, has anyone in the president's office talked to you about this lawsuit in any regard?
They have not, and the president has said he will donate the proceeds to charity. You may have missed that.
So no one at all has discussed this to you whatsoever?
No, sir, and the president said he will.
Have you received, I didn't ask any more questions. Have you received any advice from Treasury's legal division about how to handle this potential conflict?
This is a Justice Department matter. They represent Treasury in it.
Have someone from the Department of Justice actually come and talk to you saying that this is their purview and you need to stay out of it? Or who has discussed to you what is your role in this?
Our general counsel, who's sitting behind me, has told me that it is a Justice Department matter. The Justice Department defends Treasury in matters like this.
Okay, so it has been discussed with you. Do you have any final say at all in the process of this? Or is the DOJ just going to instruct you to cut a check and or settle, and you have no independence to actually make a decision whether or not the president deserves $10 billion?
Again, that is a DOJ matter.
And so the DOJ will entirely make that decision whether or not the president should receive $10 billion. You have no say at all.
Correct.
So you will just have to write the check if you were told to write the check.
Correct.
And you would write the check willingly if you were told by a DOJ to the president.
I will follow the law, Senator.
Okay. I mean, I think for many of us, this is very simple. And I think if this had been happening in any other countries, it would look an absolute, like a total shakedown of the American taxpayer. Are you also?
This is about a system under strain and a leader whose strategies are no longer working. Donald Trump is facing a moment where nearly every major pillar he relies on is under stress at the same time, and the results are visible. Start with the economy, because that is where consequences hit ordinary people first. January delivered one of the most alarming labor reports in years. Employers announced more than 100,000 layoffs in a single month, a level not seen since the depths of the Great Recession. Job openings fell again, reaching their lowest point since the pandemic era. Hiring slowed further. Companies are not expanding, they are cutting back. This matters because layoffs rising while economic growth headlines remain positive is a dangerous signal. It suggests that gains are being concentrated at the top while the workforce absorbs the pain. Economists describe this as a decoupling between growth and employment. In plain terms, it means profits can rise while workers lose jobs. That is not a healthy economy. Public sentiment reflects this reality. Polling shows that a strong majority of Americans believe the economy is in poor or only fair condition. This isn't ideological. It cuts across party lines. People feel the pressure in rent, groceries, debt, and job security. Now contrast that with the president's public response. While layoffs surged and markets showed volatility, Donald Trump appeared at a national prayer breakfast delivering remarks that bore little connection to the economic data unfolding outside the room. Instead of acknowledging the stress Americans are feeling, he spoke about personal victories, past elections, and grievances. That disconnect matters. Leadership is not about insisting everything is fine when people know it is not. When citizens see economic stress and hear denial, trust erodes. This pattern repeated itself at an international economic forum where the president framed global challenges not as shared problems requiring cooperation, but as failures of other nations.
Sad thing. And I tell it, I went over to Davos, they invited me. And when I left, they said that may have been the stupidest invitation we ever gave to somebody, Switzerland. But they have to, I just say it like it is, they're destroying their country. Their energy is ridiculous, what they've done. And the immigration is, I'm telling you, it's a place where many of these countries are not recognizable. And I'd like to see them straighten it out. Very soon, it's going to be impossible for them to straighten it out. We have our director of...
The tone was dismissive, combative, and self-focused. That approach might energize a loyal base, but it does not stabilize markets, reassure allies, or calm uncertainty. At the same time, financial markets have shown increasing instability. The cryptocurrency sector, which the president and his family have publicly embraced, experienced a sharp and sustained decline in value over recent months. Trillions in market capitalization were wiped out. Retail investors absorbed losses. Confidence weakened. Here again, perception matters. When leaders appear financially exposed or inconsistent, markets react. Volatility feeds uncertainty, and uncertainty feeds economic hesitation. While all of this unfolded, legal pressure continued to build around unresolved transparency issues tied to the Jeffrey Epstein case. This is an area where clarity, restraint, and accountability are essential. Survivors have demanded transparency. Lawmakers from across the spectrum have raised questions. Courts have been asked to intervene. What complicates this moment is not just the existence of documents, but how the administration has responded to calls for disclosure. Efforts to limit releases, narrow interpretations of transparency laws, and delay proceedings have fueled suspicion. Whether justified or not, secrecy creates distrust. It is important to be precise here. Being named in documents does not equal guilt. Association does not equal accusation. Those distinctions matter. But so does openness. When governments appear defensive rather than forthcoming, questions multiply. This is where leadership style becomes decisive. A confident administration releases information, allows scrutiny, and lets facts stand on their own. A defensive administration tries to control narratives, redirect attention, and frame critics as enemies. In recent weeks, redirection has been constant. Public focus has shifted rapidly from economic data to cultural battles, from court filings to foreign disputes, from domestic accountability to external threats. This is not accidental. It is a familiar strategy. Overwhelm the information space so nothing sticks. But this time, it may not be working. The pressure is no longer coming from one direction. It is coming from voters worried about jobs, investors worried about stability, courts demanding answers, and allies questioning reliability. These forces reinforce each other. Even within government, signs of strain are visible. Congressional hearings have raised uncomfortable questions about conflicts of interest, executive authority, and the use of public funds. Officials have acknowledged that certain decisions are outside their control, deferred entirely to the Department of Justice. That may be legally accurate, but politically it looks like abdication. At the same time, state-level developments are reshaping the political landscape. Redistricting battles, court rulings, and legislative shifts are altering the balance of power in ways that do not favor unilateral control. When multiple institutions push back simultaneously, it signals a system reasserting itself. This is the broader context people need to understand. What looks like chaos is actually consequence. Economic stress produces scrutiny. Scrutiny produces legal action. Legal action produces political exposure. Political exposure weakens control. Donald Trump's response has been to double down, to insist that critics are malicious, that data is wrong, that opposition is illegitimate. That approach can delay accountability, but it cannot stop it indefinitely. Leadership under pressure reveals character. Calm leadership narrows focus and restores confidence. Reactive leadership expands conflict and accelerates decline. We are now seeing the effects of years of personalization of power. When decisions revolve around one individual, every crisis becomes personal. When outcomes turn negative, blame spreads outward. Institutions become targets. Courts become obstacles. Journalists become enemies. Allies become adversaries. This creates a world where cooperation collapses and isolation grows. The question is no longer whether plans are backfiring. The evidence suggests they are. The question is how far the fallout will extend. Economic indicators do not turn on speeches. Markets do not respond to bravado. Courts do not yield to rhetoric. Reality applies pressure regardless of messaging. This is why this moment feels different. The overlap of economic stress, legal accountability, institutional resistance, and public skepticism is rare. It is difficult to manage even with steady leadership. With volatile leadership, it becomes explosive. History shows that when leaders respond to systemic pressure by denying reality, outcomes worsen. When they shift blame instead of responsibility, trust collapses. When they pursue personal survival over public stability, systems correct themselves in unpredictable ways. That is where we are now. What happens next will not be decided by speeches, rallies, or social media posts. It will be decided by economic conditions, judicial rulings, voter reactions, and institutional limits. Those forces move slowly, but they move relentlessly. This is not about ideology, it is about governance. It is about whether a president can adapt when strategies fail, whether accountability is accepted or resisted, whether transparency is embraced or feared. Right now, the signs point toward resistance, and resistance, when pressure is rising from every direction, rarely ends well. The coming months will test not just a presidency, but the resilience of the systems around it. The economy will continue to send signals. Courts will continue to demand answers. Voters will continue to judge outcomes, not rhetoric. And in that environment, there is no amount of noise that can permanently drown out consequence. What we are watching is not just a bad week or a rough patch. It is a collision between reality and denial, and reality eventually always wins. What makes this moment especially volatile is that the pressure Donald Trump is facing is not theoretical. It is operational. It is measurable. It shows up in balance sheets, court dockets, polling data, and institutional behavior. These are not abstract criticisms or opinion pieces. These are forces that shape outcomes, whether a leader acknowledges them or not. Start with the economic layer again, because it is the foundation of political stability. When job losses spike while productivity headlines remain strong, it creates a credibility gap. People hear that the economy is booming, but their lived experience tells a different story. They see colleagues laid off. They see hiring freezes. They see wages stagnate while costs rise. That gap breeds cynicism, and cynicism is toxic to governance. Historically, presidents survive economic downturns when they demonstrate honesty and empathy. They struggle when they deny or minimize what people are clearly experiencing. When leaders insist that conditions are excellent while households feel squeezed, trust collapses quickly. That is the environment taking shape now. At the same time, markets respond to uncertainty with caution. Capital slows. Investment hesitates. Companies delay hiring not because they hate growth, but because unpredictability raises risk. Political instability feeds directly into economic hesitation. This creates a feedback loop. Economic weakness fuels political pressure, which increases instability, which then further weakens the economy. This is not ideology, it is mechanics. Layered on top of that is the legal environment. Courts do not operate on vibes or narratives. They operate on filings, deadlines, statutes, and compliance. When deadlines are missed, judges notice. When transparency laws are interpreted narrowly or resisted, scrutiny intensifies. When survivors speak directly to courts, the tone shifts from procedural to human. That shift matters. Legal systems are designed to be dispassionate, but they are not indifferent to harm. When courts are asked to intervene because statutory requirements are not being met, the issue becomes institutional. It is no longer about politics. It is about whether the executive branch is complying with the law as written. That is a dangerous place for any administration to be, because once courts feel compelled to step in, executive discretion shrinks. Judicial oversight expands. Options narrow. This is compounded by the fact that these legal pressures are unfolding while other investigations, unrelated in subject but related in consequence, are also active. When multiple legal fronts exist at once, resources are stretched. Messaging becomes inconsistent. Defenses that might work in isolation fail when stacked on top of each other. This is where the pattern becomes visible. Not a single scandal, not a single economic report, but accumulation. Accumulation is what overwhelms administrations. Now add the institutional layer. Congress is not a monolith. Even when one party holds significant influence, institutional incentives diverge. Some lawmakers prioritize loyalty. Others prioritize survival. Others prioritize legacy. When public opinion shifts or risk increases, those incentives realign. That is when fractures appear. Hearings become sharper. Questions become more direct. Language becomes less deferential. Officials are asked not just what they believe, but what authority they have and what limits constrain them. When answers defer responsibility elsewhere, confidence erodes further. This is not rebellion, it is self-preservation. At the state level, similar dynamics are playing out. Redistricting battles, court interventions, and legislative actions are reshaping the political map. These are slow-moving but powerful forces. They do not respond to speeches. They respond to legal standards and demographic reality. When national leadership appears unstable, state actors move to protect their interests. That is not sabotage. It is federalism doing what it was designed to do. Internationally, the situation is no less complex. Allies watch economic indicators, legal disputes, and domestic unrest closely. Confidence in leadership affects everything from trade negotiations to security cooperation. When messaging is erratic or confrontational, allies hedge. They diversify partnerships. They reduce reliance. Again, this is not punishment. It is risk management. One of the most misunderstood aspects of leadership failure is that it rarely arrives with a single dramatic moment. Instead, it manifests as erosion. Small losses of confidence here, delays there, hesitation elsewhere. By the time the collapse is visible, the damage is already done. Donald Trump's current challenge is that he is facing erosion on multiple fronts at once. Economic credibility is eroding because data conflicts with rhetoric. Legal latitude is eroding because courts are being asked to enforce compliance. Political insulation is eroding because institutions are asserting independence. International leverage is eroding because unpredictability breeds caution. Public trust is eroding because denial clashes with lived experience. Each erosion reinforces the others. This is why escalation becomes tempting. When leaders feel control slipping, they often increase volume. Louder rhetoric, sharper attacks, broader enemies. The goal is to reassert dominance through force of presence. But escalation is not control, it is compensation. The danger is that escalation accelerates erosion. When every critic is framed as hostile, there are no neutral spaces left. When every institution is treated as an adversary, cooperation collapses. When every challenge is personalized, solutions disappear. That is the trap. Leadership in crisis requires contraction, not expansion. Focus, not noise. Structure, not spectacle. What we are seeing instead is diffusion, attention scattered across multiple conflicts, messaging that shifts daily, grievances recycled rather than resolved. The system responds to that by tightening constraints. This is how power rebalances in democratic systems. Not through coups or chaos, but through friction, through rules being enforced, through deadlines being honored, through checks asserting relevance. From the outside, this can look like dysfunction. In reality, it is the system doing what it was designed to do when pressure rises. The critical question is whether the executive adapts or resists. Adaptation looks like acknowledging economic pain, cooperating with oversight, releasing information transparently, and recalibrating priorities. Resistance looks like denial, deflection, and escalation. So far, resistance appears to be the dominant response. That choice has consequences. Resistance hardens opposition. It motivates scrutiny. It unites disparate critics. It turns procedural issues into moral ones. It invites institutional pushback rather than quiet negotiation. This is why moments like this are inflection points. They determine trajectories. If leadership shifts toward accountability and stability, pressure can ease, markets respond, courts de-escalate, institutions relax. If leadership doubles down on denial and confrontation, pressure compounds. We are not at an endpoint. We are at a crossroads. The next phase will be shaped by responses, not events. Events have already occurred. Data is already published. Filings are already made. Maps are already drawn. What remains is choice. Does the administration narrow its focus or widen conflict? Does it cooperate or obstruct? Does it acknowledge reality or attempt to overwrite it? History suggests that systems are patient but not passive. They absorb stress until thresholds are crossed, then they correct. That correction does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like elections shifting. Sometimes it looks like court orders. Sometimes it looks like markets refusing to cooperate. Sometimes it looks like all of those at once. This is why claims of total control ring hollow right now. Control is not declared. It is demonstrated, and demonstration requires alignment with reality. Right now, reality is pushing back. The economy is not responding to speeches. The courts are not deferring to rhetoric. Institutions are not suspending rules. Voters are not suspending judgment. That is the environment Donald Trump is operating in. And in that environment, plans that rely on dominance rather than coordination tend to fail. What comes next will depend on whether leadership recognizes that truth or continues to fight it. Either way, the system will respond, and it always does. The final piece of this moment is psychological, and it is often the most overlooked. Power does not only erode through laws or numbers, it erodes through perception. Once people begin to believe that a leader is reacting rather than directing, that perception becomes self-reinforcing. Every action is interpreted through that lens. Every statement is scrutinized for insecurity. Every escalation is read as weakness rather than strength. This is where Donald Trump finds himself now. For years, his political identity relied on the idea of inevitability, strength, control, momentum. Even critics acknowledged his ability to dominate attention and bend institutions to his will. But inevitability is fragile. Once it cracks, it cannot be repaired through force alone. What we are seeing now is a shift from dominance to defensiveness. That shift is visible in how messaging has changed. Instead of projecting confidence about the future, rhetoric increasingly focuses on grievance about the past. Instead of outlining plans, speeches circle back to personal slights. Instead of persuasion, there is accusation. This is not strategy. It is reaction. Reaction narrows options. Leaders who react are always behind events. They respond to headlines rather than shaping them. They chase narratives instead of setting agendas. That puts them in permanent defense mode. This matters because governance is cumulative. Every unresolved issue becomes weight. Every deflection compounds fatigue. Eventually, the system stops absorbing stress and starts redirecting it. That redirection is happening now. Economic stress is no longer isolated to specific sectors. It is showing up across industries. When layoffs rise sharply while leadership insists everything is fine, credibility collapses. People do not need experts to tell them what they see in their own lives. Once trust breaks at that level, no amount of messaging can repair it quickly. Legal pressure follows a similar pattern. Missed deadlines, disputed interpretations, and resistance to transparency do not disappear with repetition. Courts move at their own pace, and once scrutiny begins, it rarely retreats voluntarily. The more resistance encountered, the more judges assert authority. That is not political. That is institutional self-defense. Political pressure compounds both. Lawmakers respond to voters, donors, and survival instincts. When association becomes risky, distance increases. When loyalty threatens re-election, independence resurfaces. This is not betrayal, it is incentive. International actors respond to all of this simultaneously. They do not analyze speeches in isolation. They look at data, institutions, and stability. When volatility rises, they hedge. They delay commitments. They prepare alternatives. That weakens leverage in ways that cannot be undone with bluster. All of these forces converge, and when they converge, the margin for error disappears. At this stage, even small missteps have outsized impact. A careless remark becomes a headline. A dismissive response becomes a rallying cry. A delayed decision becomes evidence of dysfunction. This is the danger of cumulative stress. Leadership requires bandwidth. It requires the ability to prioritize, absorb shocks, and make decisions with clarity. When that bandwidth is consumed by constant defense, decision-making degrades. Focus scatters, conflicts multiply. This is why crises often accelerate once they reach a certain density. Not because events worsen dramatically, but because the capacity to manage them collapses. What we are witnessing is not chaos, it is compression. Time compresses, choices compress, options compress. That is when systems assert themselves. The judiciary asserts independence. Legislatures assert oversight. Markets assert discipline. Voters assert judgment. Allies assert boundaries. None of this requires coordination. It happens naturally when confidence erodes. This is also why spectacle becomes less effective. Shock loses power when it becomes routine. Escalation loses impact when it becomes expected. What once dominated attention now blends into background noise. The audience adapts, and when the audience adapts, control slips. This is not about personality, it is about structure. Systems tolerate disruption until disruption threatens stability. At that point, correction mechanisms engage, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, always relentlessly. Donald Trump's challenge now is that those mechanisms are active across multiple domains simultaneously. That makes reversal extremely difficult. There is still a path to stabilization. There always is. But it requires humility, transparency, and recalibration. It requires acknowledging reality rather than insisting it conform. It requires cooperation instead of confrontation. So far, there is little evidence of that shift. Instead, the pattern remains escalation without resolution, attacks without solutions, volume without direction. That is not sustainable. History is clear on this point. Leaders who adapt survive pressure. Leaders who fight reality exhaust themselves and their institutions. The coming months will not be decided by speeches or headlines alone. They will be decided by whether actions align with facts, whether governance replaces grievance, whether accountability replaces deflection. If that does not happen, the system will continue correcting. Not because it is hostile, not because it is partisan, but because it is designed to. This is the reality of democratic systems under stress. They bend, then they push back. We are in the pushback phase now. The economy is speaking. The courts are speaking. Institutions are speaking. Voters are watching. And the message is consistent. Denial does not change data. Rhetoric does not override law. Spectacle does not replace governance. What happens next will define not just a political career, but a period in American history. Because moments like this do not repeat often. They mark transitions. Transitions from dominance to accountability, from certainty to scrutiny, from control to consequence. Whether that transition stabilizes or destabilizes depends on choices still being made. But the illusion that everything is fine while everything signals otherwise cannot hold. Reality always wins, and it is asserting itself now.